The command hung in the opulent air of the gilded lyre, as sharp and cold as the diamonds on the speaker's wrist. Kneel. For the formidable Ashworth family, it was a simple lesson in hierarchy, a public humbling for a clumsy waitress. They saw a disposable servant, a nobody to be crushed under the heel of their immense wealth and influence. What they failed to see what would be their undoing was the secret she carried. A secret that lay dormant, waiting for the right moment to blaze as brightly as the legendary diamond ring she would soon reveal. The Gilded Lyre was less a restaurant and more a theatre of wealth. Its patrons were the cast, their exorbitant orders the script, and the staff were the silent, black-clad stagehands, trained to be invisible yet omniscient. Stella Richardson had been one of those stagehands for 6 months. To her colleagues, she was a quiet enigma, efficient, diligent, and possessing a strange, unshakable calm that seemed out of place amidst the nightly chaos of clattering silver and simmering egos. They assumed she was a student or an aspiring artist, someone working tirelessly to scrape together rent for a tiny apartment in a less glamorous part of New York City. They weren't entirely wrong, but the truth was infinitely more complex. Stella didn't need the money. The meticulously starched apron she tied around her waist each evening was a costume, a deliberate disguise. Her real life was on hold, paused for a self-imposed mission of reconnaissance. The purpose of this mission had a name, Nathaniel Ashworth. And Nathaniel Ashworth had a family. A very, very powerful family. She and Nathaniel had met a year ago, in a world away from this, at a charity fundraiser in London. He hadn't seen a struggling artist. He'd seen the guest of the event's primary benefactor. He was charming, intelligent, and possessed a kindness that seemed entirely at odds with the predatory reputation of his family's corporate empire, Ashworth Global. They fell in love quickly, deeply, and authentically, far from the prying eyes of their respective social circles. He proposed 3 months ago on a moonlit balcony in Santorini with a ring that felt heavier than its considerable weight in platinum and diamonds. He had told her it was the Midnight Star, a family heirloom passed down for generations. He'd slipped it on her finger, promising a future where it would be just them. But Stella knew it was never just them. The Ashworths were a dynasty, and Nathaniel was the heir apparent. He spoke of his family with a complicated affection, acknowledging their intensity, as he diplomatically put it, but assuring Stella they would love her once they met her. He painted his mother Beatrice as a formidable but ultimately fair matriarch, his father Richard as a stoic businessman focused on legacy, and his younger sister Penelope as a bit spoiled but harmless. Stella, whose own family wealth was quieter, built on generations of academic and philanthropic pursuits rather than corporate takeovers, was wary. She had heard the whispers in her own circles about Beatrice Ashworth, a woman known for her social ruthlessness and her obsession with bloodlines and public perception. So Stella had devised a plan. When Nathaniel was called away for a 2-month-long international merger deal, she told him she wanted to spend some time in New York, to be closer to his home base, renting a small place to work on a personal project. The project was securing a job at the Gilded Lyre, the Ashworths' preferred restaurant, the place where they conducted family business and celebrated their victories. She wanted to see them in their natural habitat, unvarnished and unprepared for her presence. She needed to know what she was truly marrying into. Her evenings were a blur of memorizing specials, polishing wine-on glasses until they gleamed, and navigating the treacherous terrain of the dining room floor. She learned to read the subtle cues of the ultra-rich, the impatient tap of a manicured finger, the dismissive wave of a hand, the way a person could look straight through you, as if you were made of glass. She saw greed, arrogance, and entitlement on a scale she had only ever read about. But she also saw fleeting moments of kindness, of genuine connection, which gave her hope. Her phone calls with Nathaniel were her sanctuary. His voice, warm and full of excitement about their future, would cut through her exhaustion. "I can't wait for you to meet them. Stella," he'd said just last night, his voice crackling over the line from Singapore. "I've told them so much about you. They're hosting a small welcome dinner at the estate the night I get back next week. Just family." "I'm nervous, Nat," she'd confessed, sitting on the edge of her lumpy mattress, her waitress uniform hanging on the back of the door. "Don't be. My mother can be a bit formal, but she'll see how incredible you are. Just be yourself." Be yourself. The irony was a bitter pill. Which self? The woman who could discuss 17th century art history and philanthropic investment strategies, or the woman whose hand smelled faintly of lemon polish and whose feet ached from an 8-hour shift. Tonight was supposed to be a quiet Tuesday. The restaurant was only half full, a low hum of conversation filling the cavernous space. Stella moved with practiced ease, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, and maintaining the pleasant, neutral expression required of her. Then the hush fell. It was a phenomenon unique to the arrival of true power. The ambient noise of the room dipped as the great oak doors swung open and the Ashworth family made their entrance. Beatrice Ashworth led the procession. She was a woman carved from ice, elegant and severe, in a dark Chanel suit, her silver hair styled in a flawless chignon. Her husband, Richard, trailed her, a large man whose expensive suit couldn't hide his air of perpetual dissatisfaction. And beside them, practically bouncing with a venomous energy, was Penelope. She was a younger, glossier version of her mother, her eyes darting around the room, cataloguing and dismissing everyone she saw. Their regular table, the prime corner booth that offered both privacy and a commanding view of the entire restaurant, was in Stella's section. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The performance of a lifetime. She took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed down her apron, and picked up 3 leather-bound menus. It was time to meet the in-laws. As Stella approached the booth, she could feel the temperature drop. It was as if the Ashworths generated their own personal cold front. She arranged a professional, placid smile on her face, the one she had perfected over the last 6 months. "Good evening and welcome to the Gilded Lyre," she began, her voice calm and even. "My name is Stella, and I will be your server tonight." Richard Ashworth merely grunted, already engrossed in the wine list. Beatrice's gaze swept over Stella, a flicker of something unreadable in her cold blue eyes, before she dismissed her entirely, turning her attention to the seating arrangement. It was Penelope who spoke first, her voice dripping with condescension. "Stella, is that what you said? Do try to keep up, Stella. We're in a bit of a hurry." She didn't look at her instead, focusing on her phone, her thumb swiping furiously across the screen. "Of course, miss," Stella replied, her smile not wavering. She placed the menus on the table. "May I start you with some water? We have still sparkling or our artesian. Just bring sparkling, San Pellegrino, with 4 lime wedges, not 3, not 5. And make sure they're wedges, not flimsy little slices. The last girl couldn't seem to grasp that concept." Beatrice interjected her voice like the rustle of dry, dead leaves. She still hadn't made direct eye contact, addressing a point in the air just past Stella's shoulder. The entire meal was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Every interaction was designed to subtly demean and assert dominance. When Stella presented the wine, a 1982 Chateau Margaux that cost more than her monthly rent, Richard sniffed it, swirled it, and declared it passable, as if he were doing her a personal favor by accepting it. Penelope complained that her seared foie gras was a degree too cool, forcing Stella to apologize profusely and rush it back to a kitchen staff who rolled their eyes in shared misery. Everyone knew the Ashworths. Their orders were legendary for their complexity and their complaints for their baselessness. It was a game they played a test of how much a person would bend before they broke. Stella navigated the minefield with grace. She remained polite, efficient, and unflappable. She remembered Nathaniel's words. My mother can be a bit formal, and tried to see Beatrice not as a monster, but as a guarded woman with impossibly high standards. She tried to see Penelope as a young woman, struggling under the weight of her family's name. But it was difficult. Their cruelty seemed so casual, so ingrained. During a lull as the family awaited their main courses, Stella overheard snippets of their conversation. They were discussing Nathaniel. And this fiancée of his, this Stella, Beatrice said, her voice a low murmur. What do we really know about her Richard? He's been so vague. Philanthropist family. That could mean anything. It could mean they run a bake sale for the local library. Nathaniel has a good head on his shoulders, Richard rumbled. He says the family is well established. The Richardson name has some weight in academic circles, I'm told. Not our world, but respectable. Penelope scoffed a sound like tearing silk. Respectable and boring? I looked her up. There's barely anything online. No social media presence to speak of. It's like she doesn't exist. It's creepy. Nat deserves someone with sparkle. Someone who adds to the family's profile, not a ghost. Stella's hand, resting on a nearby serving station, tightened into a fist. She felt a hot flush of anger. They were dissecting her, a person they'd never met, reducing her to a strategic asset. She took a slow breath, forcing her fingers to uncurl. This was why she was here. This was what she needed to know. The main courses arrived. Stella served Beatrice her Dover, soul deboning it, tableside with practiced precision. She set down Penelope's truffle risotto and Richard's porterhouse steak. She moved with an economy of motion, her focus absolute. For a moment, it seemed they would make it through the meal without a major incident. Then, as Stella was refilling Beatrice's wine glass, it happened. A waiter from another section, hurrying past with a heavy tray, stumbled, slightly jostling Stella's arm. It was a minuscule bump, but it was enough. A single crimson drop of the expensive Bordeaux leaped from the bottle and landed squarely on the pristine white tablecloth, a tiny, perfect circle of red just inches from Beatrice's sleeve. The silence that followed was absolute. It was thick, heavy, and suffocating. Every sound in the restaurant seemed to cease. Penelope gasped, a theatrical, delighted sound. Richard's jaw tightened. Beatrice Ashworth did not move. She slowly, deliberately turned her head, and for the first time that evening, looked directly at Stella. Her eyes were not angry. They were worse. They were cold, with the serene satisfaction of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. Well, well, Beatrice said, her voice dangerously soft. It seems we have a problem. The storm had not just gathered. It had broken. And Stella was standing at its very center. The single drop of wine on the tablecloth seemed to expand, to bleed outwards until it filled Stella's entire vision. It was a tiny mistake, an accident not even of her own making, but in the gravitational field of the Ashworth family, it was a black hole pulling all light and reason into it. I am so terribly sorry, Stella said immediately, her voice steady despite the frantic pounding of her heart. Please allow me to rectify this at once. She reached for a spare napkin, intending to blot the spill, but Beatrice raised a perfectly manicured hand, stopping her mid-motion. "Don't touch it," she commanded. The softness was gone, replaced by a steely edge. "You've done quite enough." The restaurant manager, a perpetually flustered man named Mr. Dubois, had seen the commotion from across the room and was now scurrying towards them, his face pale with anxiety. The Ashworths were his most important and most dreaded patrons. "Mrs. Ashworth, is there a problem?" he asked, wringing his hands. "There is a problem, Jean-Pierre." Penelope chimed in, leaning forward with undisguised glee. "Your clumsy waitress here has ruined my mother's evening. This is a $100,000 custom tablecloth imported from Lyon, and she just splattered it." The exaggeration was so absurd, it was almost laughable, but no one was laughing. Mr. Dubois looked at the minuscule drop of wine, then back at Beatrice's thunderous expression, and his professional courage evaporated. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Ashworth. Unacceptable. This is completely unacceptable," he stammered, turning on Stella. "What do you have to say for yourself?" "It was an accident, Mr. Dubois. Another server bumped into me," Stella explained calmly, trying to inject some reason into the escalating farce. Beatrice let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. "Excuses, the first refuge of the incompetent. It doesn't matter how it happened. It matters that it did. It matters that our experience, for which we are paying a significant amount of money, has been sullied by this carelessness." She paused, letting her words hang in the air, her gaze pinning Stella to the spot. She was enjoying this, Stella realized. This wasn't about a drop of wine. This was a demonstration. She was making an example of her for the benefit of the other diners, the other staff, and perhaps even for her own family. "This establishment's reputation is built on perfection," Beatrice continued, her voice rising just enough to be heard by the surrounding tables whose occupants were now openly staring. "Perfection in the food, the ambience, and especially the service. Service requires discipline. It requires respect. It requires a certain humility, a quality you seem to be sorely lacking." Stella stood her ground, her chin held high. "I assure you, I have the utmost respect for my position and for all of your guests." "Do you?" Beatrice's eyes narrowed into icy slits. "Then prove it. An apology is not enough for such a public failure. A gesture is required, something that shows you understand your place." Stella felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She knew with a sudden chilling certainty what was coming next. Richard looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and studying the ceiling, but he said nothing to intervene. He was a silent accomplice. Beatrice leaned forward slightly. The final words were delivered with a quiet, devastating precision. "Kneel," she said. The word was so shocking, so archaic, that it took a moment to register. Mr. Dubois' jaw dropped. Diners at the next table exchanged horrified glances. "I beg your pardon," Stella asked, her voice a near whisper. "You heard me," Beatrice said, her expression unyielding. "Kneel and offer a proper apology. On the floor. Here, now. Show us you are truly sorry for your incompetence." It was a test, a monstrous, degrading test. Every instinct in Stella's body screamed in protest. Her pride, her self-respect, the values her own family had instilled in her, all of it rebelled against this grotesque command. She looked at Beatrice's triumphant face, at Penelope's smug smirk, at Richard's cowardly avoidance. She saw the future Nathaniel had promised her, and in this moment it looked like a gilded cage guarded by dragons. Mr. Dubois, seeing the potential loss of the Ashworth's patronage, made his choice. He turned to Stella, his eyes pleading and desperate. "Just do it," he hissed under his breath. "For God's sake, just do it and let's move on. It's not worth the trouble." The trouble He saw her dignity as trouble. To him she was a disposable pawn in a game she hadn't asked to play. The pressure was immense. The entire restaurant was watching. Her job, her carefully constructed cover, her entire plan, it was all on the line. Kneeling would preserve the charade. It would appease these horrible people and allow her to continue her observation until Nathaniel returned. She could tell him what happened later, and they could face it together. But as she looked at Beatrice Ashworth, she saw more than just a future mother-in-law. She saw a bully who preyed on the powerless. She saw a woman who believed that wealth gave her the right to strip another human being of their dignity. And Stella knew, with every fibre of her being, that she couldn't be the kind of person who would kneel before that. Not for a job, not for a plan, not even for love. Because a love that required her to sacrifice her own soul wasn't love at all. It was ownership. The choice was clear. The consequences would be immense, but her self-worth was not negotiable. Stella drew herself up to her full height. The din of the restaurant had faded into a dull roar in her ears, her focus narrowing to the three faces in the booth before her. She met Beatrice's cold, expectant gaze without flinching. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a thunderclap. Beatrice's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "What did you say?" "I said no." Stella repeated, her voice clearer this time, imbued with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "I will not kneel. I have apologized for the accident. My dignity is not included in the price of your meal." A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. Mr. Dubois looked as if he might faint. Penelope's smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "How dare you!" Penelope shrieked, slamming her hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Do you have any idea who we are?" "I'm beginning to," Stella replied, her gaze unwavering. "You're people who believe that a spill on a tablecloth is a crime worthy of public humiliation. You're people who confuse wealth with worth." It was Richard Ashworth who finally spoke, his voice a low growl. "That's enough. Young lady, you are out of line." "Am I?" Stella challenged, her eyes sweeping over the three of them. "Or have you, for the first time in a long time, encountered someone your money cannot bully into submission?" Beatrice rose slowly from her seat. She was tall, and her icy composure seemed to make her even taller. She looked down her nose at Stella, the picture of aristocratic contempt. "You have made a grave mistake," Beatrice said, her voice dangerously calm. "You are not just insubordinate, you are insignificant. A speck, and you have just tried to defy a mountain." She turned to the trembling manager. "Jean-Pierre, I want this person fired. I want her gone from this establishment immediately. And I want her name so I can ensure she never works in a reputable service position in this city again." Mr. Dubois, utterly broken, nodded numbly. He turned to Stella, his face a mess of shame and fear. "You heard her. You're fired. Get your things and leave. Now." Stella felt a strange sense of liberation. The apron, once a disguise, now felt like a lead weight. She reached behind her back and untied the strings, her movements deliberate and sure. She folded the apron neatly and placed it on a nearby serving tray. She was no longer a waitress. She was Stella Richardson again. She looked at Beatrice one last time. There was no anger left in her, only a profound and weary pity. "You can take my job, Mrs. Ashworth," she said, her voice carrying across the silent dining room. "But you can't take my self-respect. It seems I have something you can't buy." Without another word, she turned her back on them. She walked away from the table through the parting sea of shocked diners, her head held high. She could feel Beatrice's hateful glare burning into her back, but she didn't look back. She walked straight through the kitchen, ignoring the stunned faces of her now former colleagues, and pushed open the heavy back door into the cool night air of the alley. Leaning against the cold brick wall, she finally allowed herself to breathe. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving a hollow ache in its place. Her plan was in ruins. Her relationship with Nathaniel's family was destroyed before it had even begun. She had stood up for herself, but what had it cost her? She pulled her phone from her pocket, her fingers trembling slightly as she scrolled through her contacts. She paused on Nathaniel's name. What would she tell him? How could she explain that the family he loved had just demanded she kneel on a dirty restaurant floor? But she didn't call Nathaniel. Not yet. Her plan hadn't been completely destroyed. It had merely changed. The reconnaissance phase was over. Now it was time for the reveal. She found another number in her contacts, a private car service she kept on retainer. "Good evening," she said into the phone, her voice regaining its steady, confident tone. "This is Miss Richardson. I need a pickup from the service entrance of the Gilded Lyre on 61st Street. Yes, as soon as possible. And please have the driver bring the garment bag from the closet. The blue one. It's time for a change of wardrobe." She hung up the phone and looked up at the sliver of star-dusted sky visible between the towering skyscrapers. Beatrice Ashworth thought she had won. She thought she had crushed an insignificant speck, but the mountain was about to find out what happens when you anger a volcano. The Ashworth estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was less a house and more a monument to its own success. A long, winding driveway snaked through acres of perfectly manicured lawns, leading to a sprawling stone mansion that looked down on the surrounding countryside with imperial disdain. Inside the atmosphere was one of triumphant satisfaction. Beatrice Ashworth sat in a high-backed armchair in the grand drawing room, a glass of sherry in her hand. The incident at the Gilded Lyre had in her mind been a resounding success. She had not only re-established her dominance, but had also created an amusing little anecdote to share at her next garden club meeting. "The audacity of that girl," Penelope was saying, pacing back and forth on the Persian rug. She had been retelling the story with increasing embellishment for the past hour. "To talk to you like that, Mother. It's a sign of the times, the complete erosion of class and respect." She was a nobody, Penelope. Nobodies sometimes get delusions of grandeur. It's our responsibility to correct them, Beatrice said coolly, taking a delicate sip of her sherry. "Consider it a public service." Richard, standing by the fireplace, cleared his throat. "Was it entirely necessary, Beatrice? The scene you caused, people were watching." "Let them watch," Beatrice retorted. "Let them see that the Ashworths do not tolerate disrespect, no matter how minor. It reinforces the brand. Strength is our brand, Richard. You should know that." He didn't argue further. He knew it was useless. The focus of their conversation soon shifted to the more pressing matter of the evening, the official welcoming of Nathaniel's fiancée. Their son was due back from Singapore this afternoon, and he was bringing Stella Richardson to the estate for a formal family dinner. "I do hope Nathaniel knows what he's doing," Beatrice mused, her brow furrowing slightly. "This Richardson girl. I've had my people do a more thorough background check. The family is clean old money, but they're academics and art patrons. Soft, no killer instinct. They're not like us. And she has no public profile," Penelope added with a huff. "It's going to be so boring, integrating her into our circle. We'll have to teach her everything." "We will mold her," Beatrice corrected. "She will learn what it means to be an Ashworth. She will understand the responsibilities and the standards required. She is, after all, marrying our name. She will be an asset, one way or another. A uniformed housekeeper appeared at the doorway. "Mr. Nathaniel has just arrived, madam. He is with a guest." "Excellent," Beatrice said, standing and smoothing down her silk dress. "Send them in. Let's finally meet the mysterious Miss Richardson." A frisson of anticipation ran through the room. Richard straightened his tie. Penelope struck a pose of casual indifference by the grand piano. Beatrice arranged her features into a mask of regal, welcoming authority. This was another performance, another demonstration of power. The fiancé would be suitably intimidated, suitably impressed, and would understand from the first moment that Beatrice was the undisputed queen of this castle. The heavy oak doors of the drawing-room swung open. Nathaniel entered, first his face, beaming with a happiness that lit up the entire room. He was handsome, tall, and carried himself with an easy confidence that his father lacked. "Mother, Father Penny," he said, his voice full of warmth. "I'm so glad to be home." He stepped aside, his arm extended back towards the doorway. "There's someone I've been waiting for you all to meet, the love of my life, my fiancée." A woman stepped into the room from the hallway behind him. The first thing they noticed was the dress. It was a stunning creation of deep sapphire silk that shimmered under the light of the crystal chandeliers. It clung to her figure elegantly, a testament to masterful tailoring. Her hair, which had been pulled back in a severe functional bun just hours earlier, now cascaded around her shoulders in soft, honey-blonde waves. Her face was expertly made up, highlighting her high cheekbones and intelligent, determined eyes. She radiated a poise and confidence that was utterly captivating. The three Ashworths stared, their welcoming smiles frozen on their faces. Their minds struggled to process what their eyes were seeing. The woman was familiar. Terribly, horribly familiar. It was the waitress. She was not wearing an apron. She was not holding a menu. She was wearing couture. And she was standing in their drawing room, holding their son's hand. Penelope's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Richard's face went slack with utter shock, the colour draining from his cheeks. But it was Beatrice who had the most visceral reaction. Her body went rigid, the sherry glass in her hand, trembling so violently that the amber liquid sloshed over the rim. Her mind reeled, replaying the scene from the restaurant, the defiance, the insolence, the girl she had fired and threatened to blacklist. The speck she had tried to crush was here. She was the mountain. Stella's gaze swept over them, calm and assessing. There was no fear in her eyes. There was no anger. There was only a cool, quiet power. She held their horrified stares for a long moment before she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her left hand and rested it on Nathaniel's arm, a gesture of both affection and presentation. And then they saw it. On the third finger of her left hand, catching the light and fracturing it into 1,000 dazzling points of fire, was the ring. It was unmistakable. A large, square-cut sapphire of the deepest blue, surrounded by a halo of brilliant-cut diamonds. It was the Ashworth family heirloom, the legendary midnight star. The sight of the ring was like a physical blow. Beatrice let out a small, strangled gasp, her knuckles white as she gripped her sherry glass. The midnight star was more than just a piece of jewellery. It was a symbol of the Ashworth matriarchy. It had been on her finger for 30 years before she had, with great ceremony, given it to Nathaniel to present to the woman who would one day take her place. And now it was on the hand of the waitress she had ordered to kneel. Nathaniel, completely oblivious to the silent, electrifying tension in the room, beamed with pride. "Well, don't just stand there," he said with a laugh. "Come and say hello. This is Stella, Stella Richardson. The name landed with the finality of a death sentence. Stella Richardson. The girl from the respectable family. The ghost with no social media presence. The woman they had just been discussing how to mold. Stella offered a small, polite smile. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you all in person," she said, her voice the same calm, measured tone she had used at the restaurant. The contrast between her words and the context was dizzying. Penelope was the first to find her voice, though it came out as a choked squawk. What are you doing here?" Nathaniel's smile faltered. He looked from his sister's horrified face to Stella's serene one, a deep line of confusion creasing his brow. "What do you mean?" "Penny. She's with me. Stella, have you met my sister before?" "Oh, we've met," Stella said softly, her eyes locking with Beatrice's. "Just this evening, in fact, at the Gilded Lyre." The name of the restaurant hung in the air like poison gas. Nathaniel's confusion deepened into concern. He looked at his mother, at his father's ashen face. "At the restaurant? What are you talking about?" "Were you all having dinner there tonight?" he asked. Richard cleared his throat, a desperate attempt to seize control of a situation spiraling into catastrophe. "Nathaniel's son, there seems to be a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Stella said, stepping forward. She finally let go of Nathaniel's arm, standing on her own, a solitary figure of immense strength in the vast, opulent room. "Your family and I had a very clear interaction a few hours ago. I was their waitress." Nathaniel stared at her, then back at his family, his mind refusing to connect the dots. "You were there. Waitress Stella, what is this? Is this some kind of joke?" "I assure you, your mother wasn't laughing," Stella replied, her gaze still fixed on Beatrice. "She was quite insistent, in fact. She felt my service was lacking. There was an accident, a single drop of wine spilled on the tablecloth. As a consequence for my incompetence, your mother demanded that I kneel on the floor and apologize to her in front of the entire restaurant. Every word was delivered with quiet, factual precision. There was no hysteria, no accusation, just the cold, hard recounting of events. The effect was devastating. Nathaniel's face transformed. The happy, loving expression dissolved, replaced by a slow, dawning horror. He turned to his mother, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Mother, is this true?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Tell me she's lying." Beatrice was trapped. The evidence was right there in front of her. The defiant girl from the restaurant, wearing the family's most sacred heirloom. Denial was impossible. She tried to rally, to reframe the narrative. "Nathaniel, you don't understand the context," she began, her voice strained. The girl was insubordinate. She was rude. She showed a complete lack of respect for... "Did you ask her to kneel?" Nathaniel interrupted, his voice growing louder, harder. "Yes or no?" Beatrice faltered. The silence was her answer. "My God!" Nathaniel breathed, stepping back, as if he could no longer bear to be near them. He looked at his father. "And you? You just sat there and let this happen?" Richard looked away, shamefaced. "It was between your mother and the waitress, Nat. It wasn't my place." "Not your place," Nathaniel's voice rose to a roar. "To defend a person's basic human dignity. This is the woman I love, the woman I am going to marry. And you treated her like dirt beneath your shoes." He turned back to Stella, his eyes filled with a pain and shame so profound it seemed to wound her more than the Ashworths' cruelty had. "Stella, I had no idea. I am so sorry." "It's not you who needs to apologize, Nat," she said, gently reaching out to touch his arm. It was then that Beatrice made her final fatal error. Seeing Stella comfort her son, she misinterpreted it as a sign of weakness, a chance to regain the upper hand. "This is a trick," she declared, her voice regaining its imperious tone. "This was all a setup. She took that job deliberately to entrap us, to embarrass us. She is a manipulative, social-climbing charlatan." Stella dropped her hand from Nathaniel's arm and faced her future mother-in-law directly. The gentleness was gone, replaced by an unyielding resolve. "You're right about one thing, Beatrice," she said, using the first name with deliberate familiarity. "I did take that job deliberately. I took it because I'd heard stories about your family. I'd heard whispers about your cruelty, your arrogance, your belief that your name and your money put you above common decency. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to believe the man I love, who saw you all through a filter of love and loyalty. So I decided to see for myself. I wanted to know the truth before I committed my life to this family." She paused, letting the confession sink in. "And tonight you showed me. You showed me everything I needed to see. This wasn't a trick to entrap you. It was a test, and all three of you failed spectacularly. The drawing room, once a bastion of Ashworth power, had become a courtroom, and Stella was the star witness, prosecutor, and judge all in one. Her final words hung in the air, an indictment from which there was no escape." Nathaniel looked at his family as if seeing them for the first time. The formidable mother, the powerful father, the glamorous sister. The illusions he had carried his whole life shattered, revealing the ugly, petty cruelty beneath. The discovery was a visible agony on his face. "So this is who you are," he said, his voice flat with disillusionment. "This is what we are. Bullies. People who get their kicks out of tormenting someone they think is beneath them." Beatrice, finally realizing the extent of the damage, attempted to switch tactics from aggression to damage control. "Nathaniel, darling, let's not be dramatic," she said, forcing a placating smile. "It was a misunderstanding, a terrible, regrettable misunderstanding." "Stella, my dear," she said, turning a now oily charm on her, "I had no idea who you were. If I had known, of course. Well, I can be headstrong. I apologize. Let's put this unfortunate incident behind us and start again." The apology was so transparently self-serving, so utterly devoid of genuine remorse that it was more insulting than the original offense. "You're not sorry for what you did, Beatrice," Stella stated calmly. "You're sorry you did it to me. You're sorry you got caught. If I had been just a waitress, you would be dining out on the story of my humiliation for weeks. Your apology means nothing." "She is right," Nathaniel said, his voice like stone. He walked over to Stella's side, taking her hand and intertwining his fingers with hers. It was a clear, unambiguous choice. He was with her. "Your apology isn't for Stella. It's for the midnight star on her finger. It's for the Richardson family's reputation. It's for the merger you're hoping her family's philanthropic connections can smooth over. It's all business, isn't it, Mother? Even love, even family." He looked from his mother's panicked face to his father's impotent one, and finally to his sister, who was staring at the floor for once in her life, utterly speechless. "I have spent my entire life making excuses for you," Nathaniel continued, his voice thick with emotion, "telling myself that your coldness was just a high standard, that your ruthlessness was just good business, that your snobbery was just protecting the family name. I was wrong. It's a sickness, a poison, and I will not allow it to touch my wife." He squeezed Stella's hand. "We're leaving." "Nathaniel, don't be ridiculous," Richard boomed, finally finding his voice. "This is your home. This is your family. You don't throw away your entire life over a squabble with a servant." The word servant was the final nail in the coffin. Nathaniel flinched as if struck. She was never a servant, Father. She was an honorable person, doing an honorable job. A concept you wouldn't understand, he said with chilling finality. And as for this being my home, a house built on cruelty and arrogance isn't a home. It's a prison. We'll be staying in the city tonight. I'll have someone collect my things tomorrow. He started to lead Stella towards the door. Beatrice, in a last desperate act, rushed to block their path. Nathaniel, think about what you're doing, she pleaded, her composure finally cracking completely. Think of the family, the business, the scandal. Nathaniel stopped and looked at his mother, a deep sadness in his eyes. I am thinking of family, he said softly. The one I am going to build with Stella. A family based on respect, kindness, and integrity. It was Stella who had the final word. She looked over Nathaniel's shoulder at the broken, furious woman before her. You wanted me to kneel, Beatrice, she said, her voice clear and steady, without a trace of triumph or malice. But a person's worth isn't determined by their posture before the powerful. It's determined by their character, when they believe no one of consequence is watching. I came here tonight, hoping to be welcomed into a family. Instead, I'm leaving with the man I love, and a very clear understanding of what we're leaving behind. With that, she and Nathaniel walked out of the drawing room, leaving the 3 remaining Ashworths standing in the deafening silence of their gilded cage. The dynasty was not destroyed, but it was fractured, perhaps irreparably. A reckoning had come not in the form of a corporate takeover or a market crash, but in the quiet defiance of a woman who refused to kneel. A woman who walked in wearing a diamond ring and walked out with their most valuable asset, their son. Together they stepped out into the night, leaving the cold stone mansion behind them, ready to build a new legacy, one founded not on the brittle foundation of power, but on the unshakable bedrock of character. The silence inside the heated leather interior of the town car was a universe away from the suffocating tension of the Ashworth drawing room. As the gates of the estate receded in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the night, Nathaniel finally let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a lifetime. He slumped in his seat, the adrenaline of the confrontation draining away to leave a raw, hollowed-out emptiness. He stared out the window, watching the manicured perfection of Greenwich give way to the more chaotic reality of the highway, his reflection a pale, haunted mask in the glass. Stella remained quiet, giving him the space he needed. She simply rested her hand on his, her warmth, a steady, grounding presence. After several miles, he turned to her, his eyes filled with a mosaic of pain, shame, and a profound, heartbreaking sorrow. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Stella, I am so sorry. For all of it. For who they are. For what they did to you. For me not seeing it, for bringing you into that poison. Stella squeezed his hand. You have nothing to be sorry for, Nat. You didn't know because you are not like them. You see the world through a lens of decency, and you assumed your own family did too. That's a credit to your character, not a flaw. But I defended them to you, he insisted, shaking his head. I told you my mother was formal. Formal, she was cruel. My father was stoic. He was a coward. And Penny. God, I let their toxicity become my normal. I can't believe I was so blind. You weren't blind, you were a son, she corrected gently. And tonight you chose. You didn't choose a side, you chose a principle. You chose respect. You chose me. That's the only thing that matters now. He finally met her gaze, and in his eyes she saw the storm begin to settle. He leaned in, and kissed her, not with the passion of a lover, but with the deep, searching gratitude of a survivor who had just found a lifeboat. "I love you, Stella Richardson," he said against her lips, "more than you'll ever know." "I love you too," she replied, "and we're going to be fine." The weeks that followed were a trial by fire. The Ashworths, true to form, did not go quietly. The first salvo was financial. A curt letter arrived from Ashworth Global's legal team informing Nathaniel that his corporate accounts had been frozen, pending a full review of his position, and that his personal trust managed by his father was under administrative suspension. It was a clear, brutal message: fall in line or be cut off. The second salvo was social, and it was pure Beatrice. Subtle, poisonous whispers began to circulate through the city's elite circles. Whispers about a cunning, ambitious girl who had staged an elaborate deception to ensnare the Ashworth heir. Columns in gossip pages, penned by writers on Beatrice's payroll, hinted at a troubled waitress with a history of opportunism. They never named Stella, but they didn't have to. The narrative was designed to isolate her, to paint her as the villain, and Beatrice as the wronged matriarch protecting her family. Stella and Nathaniel weathered it all from the sanctuary of a sleek, modern apartment they had leased in Tribeca, a space filled with light art and the quiet hum of a life they were building together. It was paid for by Stella. Her family, upon hearing the full story, had offered their unwavering support. Her father, a man who valued academic integrity over stock portfolios, had been quietly furious. "Character is the only currency that matters, Stella," he had told her over the phone. And that family appears to be bankrupt. One evening, Nathaniel was staring down at a tablet displaying the latest hit piece, his jaw tight with anger. "I should respond," he muttered. "I should issue a statement, tell everyone the truth of what they did." Stella came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders and resting her chin on his head. "And what would that accomplish?" she asked softly. "It would just be another battle in their war. Mud wrestling with them in public is still playing their game. They thrive on drama and scandal. We don't." She pointed to a set of architectural blueprints laid out on the large dining table. "Our response is right there." The blueprints were for the Richardson Ashworth Foundation. It was their new project, their new life's work. Using Stella's family capital and Nathaniel's sharp business acumen, now untethered from the predatory ethos of Ashworth Global, they were creating a new kind of enterprise, a venture philanthropy fund dedicated to supporting sustainable technology and ethical businesses. It was the antithesis of everything his family stood for. Just then his phone rang. The caller ID read, "Richard Ashworth." He looked at Stella, his expression wavering. She nodded, giving him a look of encouragement. He answered, putting the call on speaker. "Nathaniel." His father's gruff voice filled the room. "We need to talk." "I think we've said everything that needs to be said," Nathaniel replied coolly. "Don't be a fool, son," Richard grumbled. "Your mother, she was emotional. She overreacted. We all did. But this has gone on long enough. It's time to come home. Your position on the board is waiting. We can put this whole unfortunate business with Miss Richardson behind us." The casual dismissal of Stella, the reduction of their life-altering confrontation to an unfortunate business, was the final confirmation Nathaniel needed. "Her name is Stella," Nathaniel said, his voice hard as ice. "And she is my future. The life you're offering, the position on the board, the money. It's all part of a world I no longer want. It's a world where you demand people kneel, Father. I'm choosing to stand." There was a pause on the other end. "You're throwing away your birthright," Richard said, his voice laced with disbelief. For what? For some naive girl and a half-baked charity project. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm building something, Nathaniel countered, looking at Stella with a small, confident smile. Something that won't require me to sell my soul. Goodbye, Father. He ended the call before Richard could reply. The silence that followed was peaceful clean. It was the sound of a final door closing, a final chain breaking. He took Stella's hand, the midnight star cool against his palm. For his mother, the ring had been a symbol of ownership, of a dynasty's continuation. For him and Stella it was now something else, entirely. It was a beautiful stone, salvaged from a ruin, a reminder of the past they had survived to build a better future. So, Stella said, a playful light in her eyes, the Richardson Ashworth Foundation. Are you ready to get to work, Mr. Ashworth? He pulled her close, his heart full, not with what he had lost, but with everything he had gained. Absolutely, Miss Richardson, he said before kissing her. Let's go build a legacy. Stella's story is a powerful reminder that a person's worth is not defined by their uniform or their bank account, but by the strength of their character. The Ashworths learned a brutal lesson. True power isn't about demanding others to kneel, but having the grace to stand tall with integrity. They believed they were unassailable, but they forgot that empires can be shaken, not by armies, but by a single, quiet no. If this story of defiance, love, and a spectacular reckoning resonated with you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life dramas. Your engagement helps us bring these incredible stories to light. And we have to ask, so comment below, what would you have done in Stella's position?